Part 3, Rush to Judgment. In April of 2007, there was a shooting at Virginia Tech University. That's in Virginia, for those of you who are schooled in the LA City School District. 33 people were killed, 17 were wounded. Notice how upside down that number seems. By a person by the name of Sung Hui Cho, a student who killed himself, but not after two separate shooting rampages, one that lasted for a couple of 10 minutes and then a 45-minute lag period and then another period of time shooting more people, stretched over a 2.5 hour period. Cho sent a package also through the mail to NBC News with photos of him going on some rant against this, that, and the other, showing himself with guns, ranting on about the wealthy brats and snobs and all this kind of stuff, showing that he was not all there. He had a history of mental health problems, and here we go again with the inability of our society to find, locate, recognize, and watch people, even if they're not immediately endangering themselves or other people. It became at the time the deadliest mass shooting in the USA up to that time. The rush to judgment is amazing. Virginia Tech, or VTech, VATech, some people call it, was a gun-free zone, leaving it defenseless, of course. Hearkening to other shootings of a similar ilk that we've all heard of that I did not make as part of this list. The Umpqua College, Oregon shooting, the Florida nightclub shooting, the Thousand Oaks, California bar shooting, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, Parkland, Florida school, Sandy Hook, Aurora, Colorado movie theater, and on and on and on and on. All these places were gun-free zones. Versus incidences where guns actually stopped the shooter or shortened the length of time the shooter was shooting. 2003 Appalachian Law School, where the shooter was stopped by 2 students after 3 shots were fired. In 1997, a high school in Pearl, Mississippi, the assistant principal went out to his car, got his gun, and stopped the shooter after 3 people were killed. Here's a fact. Depending on, well, I'll say fact in quotes because it depends on what information you find. Certain studies say that certain studies say this differently. So it depends on who you believe. Google is rampant with fake news and fake facts too, so you have to dig sometimes. And of course, when you get onto Google or any other search engine, all the lefties are listed on the first page. You know, stuff from The Nation and The Atlantic and CNN and ABC, NBC, CBS. All their stuff is right up front. Trying to find the stuff from the right wing point of view is not as easy to find. I wonder why that is. What are they hiding? Or what are they trying or hoping to hide? Some studies say that only 30% of the mass shootings over a long period of time, say since 1950, had occurred in non-gun-free zones, meaning that 30%, meaning that 70% of them occurred in gun-free zones. But there are other studies that say that that number is far worse, that only 2% of mass shootings occurred in non-gun-free zones, or to say 98% of them occurred in gun-free zones. Neither of those statistics are very good, folks, and they still both are very telling. If you got on a plane and you had a 30% chance of surviving unless you had a gun on you, would you get a gun? Libs tried to use the incident of the Vatex shooting, of course, to further gun control laws, of course. Cho used a .22 caliber gun and a 9mm gun. So he had a lot of guns and a lot of ammo, by the way. Hundreds and hundreds of rounds. But a .22 and a 9mm. These are not exotic weapons. They are not powerful weapons as they go. And they weren't illegal weapons. The usual cadre of celebrities, many of whom have bodyguards and guard gates at their houses, by the way, spoke out, like the likes of Beyonce, Julianne Moore, Amy Schumer, Jeremy Renner, etc., etc., etc. As they always do, try to convince, or curtail, the Second Amendment. This time they were after the gun show loophole, even though he didn't get his guns from a gun show. Trying to close the gun show loophole, except guns purchased from gun shows haven't really ever been used in mass shootings. Assuming, of course, there really is a loophole at a gun show, and I'm not 100% sure there is anymore. Maybe then. They try to convince people that most mass shootings occur with legally acquired guns. Meaning the guy went out and got it because of a loophole, or because of a bad background, or because of a bad or a background check that didn't do much. Except, again, many mass shootings are actually occurred with guns that are stolen or purchased illegally. Black market. But these are facts that just can't be mentioned because it upsets the little deer's narrative. Let's move on to July of '09. And an incident that occurred with the Cambridge police, Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Harvard. A Harvard University professor, Henry Gates, came home from an overseas trip to find that his front door was jammed shut. He couldn't open it. He had his driver come out of the car. I guess he had his own driver. And help him bust through his front door. Local witnesses reported a break-in and burglary and called the police, who came onto the scene, came upon Professor Henry Gates, a black man, and perhaps his driver was still there, I don't know, and thought he was breaking into that house. But rather than calmly describe or exclaim or explain who he was and what the occasion was, the very liberal and very outspoken and very much involved in all this, black versus white crap as a professor, Henry Gates, refused to calm down, escalated the incident, and had to be restrained and arrested by the responding officer, a man by the name of Sergeant James Crowley. He was arrested for disorderly conduct. The charges, of course, were dropped 5 days later when everything got figured out that he wasn't actually, that was his place, he wasn't burglaring, and that calmer heads prevailed. 3 days later, President Obama, who injected himself into this issue, invited the professor and the sergeant, the cop, to the White House for what the Rose Garden, for what later became known as the Beer Summit, the now famous Beer Summit. Obama, after already stirring up the pot, decided he wanted to calm the waters. Can't we all just get along? The rush to judgment on this one started with Obama. He inserted himself into a local situation. This wasn't even a national thing. I mean, it was on national news, yeah, but it wasn't a national issue. It was a local issue. And he decided, I'm going to poke my nose under the tent here and get myself in the middle of it. Presidents don't tend to do that, but he did. He waited no time to say the police acted stupidly in a speech. He didn't know what the hell went on. He didn't know all the facts. He didn't know what Professor Henry Gates was doing or not doing. He assumed, like a lot of dilettantes on the left, and especially people who are African American, I suppose, a large number of them, that the white police officer was wrong, the black professor was right, and was being harassed. Obama made claims of disproportionality regarding minorities being stopped by law enforcement and went into that whole tirade, that tired tirade, which has been disproven 1,000 ways from Sunday in terms of numbers. The actual guilt of black people being arrested by white officers far outweighs the times when they're just actually being harassed. Al Sharpton, of course, swooped in his usual way and cried police abuse and racial profiling on all the rest of it, even though Crowley was appointed by his black police commissioner to be an instructor, by the way, for the police academy, in a course, believe it or not, called racial profiling. A course he taught for 5 years. That's right. This supposed racial profiling sergeant taught a course at the police academy about racial profiling for 5 years. Fellow law enforcement officers across the country sided with Crowley and excoriated Obama for commenting on a local issue, a local matter, without knowing all the facts first, and throwing back police minority community relations gains that they had made over recent years because of his stirring up the pot. Let's move on, shall we? And we now come to the infamous Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman case, February 2012. 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, a young black young man, was fatally shot and killed by George Zimmerman, who was a neighborhood watch volunteer in Sanford, Florida. A neighborhood, the neighborhood that they were in when this occurred, which was Zimmerman's neighborhood, or his father's stepmother's neighborhood, something like that, had experienced a series of recent break-ins and burglaries. So this was known to George Zimmerman as a neighborhood watch volunteer. Trayvon Martin was walking down the street in this neighborhood, having come from some convenience store, in a hoodie. He was not known in the area. This was not his neighborhood. Maybe it was his stepmother. Anyway, Zimmerman saw him and called the non-9/11 non-emergency police number to report a suspicious person, and he was told by the police not to follow Trayvon Martin, the suspect. He did not, despite facts to the contrary, follow him. He was aware of where he was, but he did not follow him. When police arrived sometime later, Martin was dead, and Zimmerman had a bloody nose and cuts on his face and the back of his hand. On the back of his head, right here. And Zimmerman was questioned but released. He was not charged with anything. It might have been the release without charge that set the world on fire, but the rush to judgment on this case was rampant from all sides of all quarters, I should say, all nooks and crannies from the progressive left. Once again, Obama himself thrust his dumbass into a situation he had no business commenting on when he commented on it. He said, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. Even this day, I still don't know what the hell that was supposed to mean. Martin's parents and many others decided Zimmerman profiled Trayvon because he was black. The media completely ignored, we'll get back to that one, media completely ignored the ground and pound aspect of the tussle between the two before Martin was shot, which led to them also purposely ignoring or misinterpreting Florida's Stand Your Ground law, which allows people to use lethal force to defend themselves if they fear for their safety, not just fear for their life, but fear from getting hurt, and does not require them to retreat, even if it is possible to retreat. In the end, the jury saw this as simple self-defense, and the stand your ground law didn't even apply. Joan Good witnessed Martin raining blows on Zimmerman from on top of him, while Zimmerman yelled for help. His head injuries were consistent with his testimony. That's the ground and pound. Zimmerman was was underneath Trayvon, getting pummeled by Trayvon, who was, by the way, fairly big dude at 17. The media purposely used a younger photo of Trayvon to sway public opinion, even when a more recent photo was available. How nice of them. NBC went so far as to edit the recorded comments of Zimmerman to the police to make it sound more like racial profiling. We'll finish up with the Trayvon and George in our next part.